It's Nolan.
Now, before we get started, make sure y'all hitting that like button. Make sure y'all sharing it on your respective platforms. Let somebody know what we're doing today. Now, let's get into the show.
It's Nolan. Yeah. The ice cream truck ain't never been cold as me. 7 deadly sins I'm bringing my soul to keep. Illuminati ain't never gonna have control of me. I breathe life to the gang, treat it like ovaries. The pen and pad with the passion of Christ. And everybody claim the trap, but they men or they mice. A couple months left for features, I'm raising the price. Ain't nobody worthy of a verse, ain't no way we alike. I've been on my shit 10 straight. Back when Pops had the templates, before the 10 fade, I gave plenty niggas the template. Had your girl using them fingers more than the Kimbe. Trashy ass albums, y'all better just stick to mixtapes. Underground nigga know the dirtiest, the roller derby, black eyed peas before the Fergie. Suppressing my feelings, I made way for my dealings to make the shillings, but y'all can't trust a soul in this business, not even Russell Simmons. Legendary, this shit was given hereditary. Vocabulary, it came from reading the dictionary. By January 2020, it's got a ball. I'ma start exposing niggas like it's Mardi Gras. Affiliated with none. Let me stick to my guns. Nobody fucking with me. Shit, I'm a nun. Gather round, young world. Hope you're ready for the future. When these blogs start twisting my words like Kama Sutra, I was trying to keep it cleaned up, but now I'm self-esteemed up. Now I'm beamed up. The fifth dimension is open. How many shrooms you think it take to get up on my level? Bitch, I'm sober. They can't take away my gold medals. Do it look like I lack focus and drive? Sniper rifle on me, I aim, focus and drive. Society menace, dividing these minutes. The government be trying to kill us. Survival of fittest, a far cry from the richest. Got $1 million in my heart. Know some killers in my hood with more guns than perfect dark. Niggas still downgrading these women, calling them thoughts. It's ignorant thoughts, and y'all let them move up the charts. It's all a farce in the media. Y'all can sift through the mediums. You can read up on Medium. How my shit is a premium. I'm finna drop exclusively with Patreon and start dissing everybody like I'm JC on. The flow water like Avion. I'm Savion Glover when he walk in the stadium. Start tapping on your pockets. I'm Rudy Tomjanovich with the Rockets. You questioning my essence, it's best to just change the topic.
What's going on, beautiful people? It's the kid J Nolan here. Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Industry, your number one source for music, entertainment, commentary, and breakdowns. Hope everybody out there is doing well on this Wednesday afternoon. Now, y'all know that this Diddy thing has been going on for a very long time. This is pretty much the day that everybody has been waiting on from the beginning to see where things were going to turn up. Unfortunately, I just did not have the time and or the capacity to keep up with this Diddy case on YouTube 5 days a week for multiple hours per day. That just was not something that was in the cards for me. I told y'all to check out the people that were, on the ground, actually in the courtroom, on site during this trial. I tried to get in where I fit in, but there was just so much other stuff going on in hip hop, other conversations that took precedence, as this is a hip hop channel, not a legal channel specifically. But here we are. The verdict is in today, and Diddy has been found guilty on only 2 out of 5 charges. Okay, so we're going to get into what he was found guilty on and what he was found not guilty on. We're going to get into the conversation that happened in the courtroom this morning, leading up to the verdict. And we're going to also get into the letters that have been submitted to the judge about Diddy's release. Okay? Because at this point, they're now waiting on sentencing. So while Diddy awaits sentencing, the defense would like for him to be able to go to Miami and live peacefully while they figure out what the next steps are going to be. Or, as far as the prosecution is concerned, they would like for him to remain in jail. All right. And letters have been submitted to the judge, both sides giving their reasons as to why it should go as they propose. All right. There's also been a letter submitted to the judge from somebody by the name of Deontay Nash, who says that they fear for their safety. We're going to get into all of those things to cover this, this crazy ass day. Okay. But let's start from the top. Of course, y'all know Inner City Press does his best to stay up to date on everything. So this is going back to around 9 a.m. this morning. U.S. versus Sean Combs, day 35, jury deliberation, day 3, after verdicts reached on counts 2 through 5. Unpersuadable opinions on RICO, Inner City Press covers. Okay. So they start. Sean Combs is in the courtroom talking with his lead lawyer, Agnifilo. Also in the well, Shapiro, Westmoreland, Driscoll, Steele. Prosecutors nowhere to be seen. 9:30, now Sean Combs is talking with his lawyer, Nicole Westmoreland, while four other of his lawyers huddle to the side. Combs stands up, asking marshals, and is allowed to speak to his family seated in the front row, now back into holding cell. 9:54, the only person at the three lawyers' tables in the courtroom is Combs' lead counsel, Mark Agnifilo, purple ties, working his cell phone with two thumbs. Combs' family has cleared out from front room of the gallery for now. 10:01, there's movement in the courtroom. Combs' other lawyers have returned. There is word of a jury note, nothing confirmed yet. 10:03, word given. There's a verdict in U.S. versus Combs. We'll continue live tweeting below. 10:06, the prosecutors have filled the seats at the front table. Sean Combs has still not been brought back into the courtroom from the holding cell. 10:10, Sean Combs had been brought back into the courtroom by U.S. Marshals. He is seated with Brian Steele on his left, Tony Garagos on his right, his family in second row of the gallery. Okay, here we get the judge addressing the room. We have received a note at 9:52 a.m. It reads, "We have reached a verdict on all counts. Anything to address before we bring our jury out?" No. Judge says maintain order while the verdict is being read and until we have the jury out. Judge says, I'll ask our deputy to bring back our jury. Sean Combs remains seated. His 8 lawyers are standing up. Judge says, all rise. We have received your note. Juror number 5, have you reached a verdict? Juror 5 says we have. Is it unanimous? They state it is. Please provide the verdict for the deputy. Judge says the deputy will inquire as to the verdict. Deputy, in the matter of U.S. v. Combs, count 1, they state not guilty. All right. Deputy, as trafficking of Cassandra Ventura, they say not guilty. Transportation for prostitution, guilty. Jane, S. trafficking, not guilty. Transportation of prostitution, Jane, guilty. Okay, so let's say count 1, not guilty. 2, not guilty. 3, guilty. 4, not guilty. 5, guilty. All right, so the RICO, not guilty. S. trafficking, not guilty on both counts for Cassie and Jane Doe, but he was found guilty for transportation for the usage of prostitution for both Cassie and Miss Jane Doe. All right, so those are the only charges that he was found guilty on after the full trial. Okay. Judge says, I asked the media not to question jurors about their deliberations. Jurors, you can contact our chambers. You gave up a lot these 10 weeks. It is inspiring. You work together, rain or shine. You answered the call of public service. That should give us hope. Judge says, I need to address a few matters with the lawyer, then I will come back to meet with you, jurors. All rise to the jury. Jurors exit for the last time. Judge says, I'll hear any application, then about a sentencing date. Agnifilo says he should be released. Of course, that's Diddy's lead defense lawyer, Agnifilo, stating he wants Diddy freed. Agnifilo says he is no longer charged with S trafficking or racketeering. His plane has been chartered. It is in Maui. He does not have access to his plane. This is his first conviction, and it is a prostitution offense. He should be released. All right. So they are advocating for Diddy to go ahead and be let out while awaiting sentencing. Agnifilo says his family is here and could sign a bond. He should be released today to go back and to live at 2-Star Island. Judge says this is just coming up right now. I will hear from the government in a moment. Are you proposing he just walk outside now? Agnifilo says yes. Judge says you are proposing $1 million bond. Agnifilo says yes, and travel to Florida, New York, and LA. So $1 million bond, and wants to be permitted to travel between Florida, New York, and LA, the 3 primary stomping grounds of where Diddy conducts business or lives. Okay, U.S. Attorney Comey says the U.S. opposes his release. A person found guilty shall be detained until the judicial officer finds he is not likely to flee or be a danger. The defendant faces a maximum sentence of 20 years. Even while faced with this case, he assaulted Jane. Here in New York, preparing to surrender, he had drugs in his hotel room, was ready to commit this same offense. Okay, so the prosecution is saying, hey, there's a maximum sentence of 20 years on the line. Okay, he's an assaulter, and even in preparing to surrender, he was breaking the law with drugs and was ready to commit the same offense, probably as in a freak off, before he even began trial. Judge says, I am not going to resolve this second. I need to review the statutes. Ms. Comey, do you have a case in which bail was denied after a conviction under the MANN Act? And of course, the MANN Act is what Diddy is being found guilty for. We'll pull up the MANN Act in just a moment. They say you may confer and come back. We'd plan to be here the whole day. Comey retorts, I am aware of cases involving minors, but we intend to raise relevant conduct at sentencing, the drugs, and violence. Judge says, I'll like letters from each side. When? Comey says a few hours. Judge comes back. I think that makes sense. Mr. Combs does not want to go back to the MDC. He is shaking his head. So 1 p.m. letters, and we'll convene in the afternoon. I'll let the parties know when. Agnifilo says he would be a fool, which he is not, to violate any conditions. So that's Agnifilo, Diddy's defense, saying he's not going to break any of the restrictions placed upon him, right? He's not going to fall back into previous old habits that would, of course, get him locked up again. But we'll just have to see. At this point, they are adjourned. Inner City Press says at 10:38 a.m., after judge leaves courtroom, from the gallery, a loud clapping and cheering as Sean Combs is led back into his holding cell. So at this point, there is a loud celebration taking place outside the courtroom. All right? People are celebrating. They turning the fuck up. They playing Bad Boy for Life out there in New York. Ain't that about a bitch? Now, I will go ahead and admit, this is not the outcome that I had predicted. This is not what I foresaw happening. I still feel as though RICO was very much relevant, especially being that his actual employees, multiple employees, were involved in the facilitation of these freak-offs. If they were doing interstate travel with the use of prostitution, then that would also mean that his corporation was partaking in those actions knowingly and for many years, starting what, in 2009 up until 2024? That's a 15-year inclusion in crime. Of course, my opinion has nothing to do with legal matters in a courtroom. I've been trying to tell y'all that for a while, because just because I may see it a certain way and it seems logical does not mean that is how the court will fare. Not to mention the coercion or the financial dependency of said victims. And if they're victims in one case, they're saying they may be victims in interstate travel for escort activity, but not for trafficking. Okay? I don't make the rules. Now, here we are with Diddy's letter to the judge, all right? This is coming from his defense, where they're making their proposal, their full proposal, 6 pages, for Diddy to be released on bond and to have, relative freedom while he awaits sentencing. So the letter states, Dear Judge Subramanian, Mr. Combs moves for release on appropriate conditions pursuant to 18 U.S.C. 3143A1 pending his sentencing proceeding. Given the jury's clear verdict acquitting Mr. Combs of the RICO conspiracy and trafficking counts, continued detention of Mr. Combs is inappropriate. As these proceedings have demonstrated, and as we told the court from the outset of this case, Mr. Combs came to New York to surrender in order to defend against the government's charges because he was committed to showing his innocence. Since his arrest and detention on September 17, 2024, Mr. Combs has obeyed the court, respected these proceedings, and demonstrated model behavior at the MDC. I don't know about model behavior. I mean, you was out here jacking niggas for their phone time and setting up bribery phone calls, but whatever. But I guess that's model behavior. And today, the jury unambiguously rejected the government's allegations that Mr. Combs ran a years-long criminal enterprise or engaged in trafficking, the core of the government's case. Mr. Combs stands convicted of 2 Mann Act counts and his sentencing exposure is substantially lower than when the government initially sought detention. The court should release Mr. Combs on the proposed conditions. A. Applicable law. Under 18 U.S.C. 3143A1, a defendant who has been found guilty of an offense is entitled to release pending sentencing if the court finds by clear and convincing evidence that he is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety or of any other person or the community if released under Section 3142B or C. Aside from the burden of proof resting on the defendant rather than the government, the operative standards are the same as those outlined in Section 3142B or C that the court considered at the outset of the proceedings. See 18 U.S.C. 3143A. Defendant is released in accordance with Section 3142B or C. Thus, when evaluating whether the defense has met its burden, the court must consider if a condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the appearance of the person as required and the safety of any other person and the community. As for flight risk, it is insufficient to rely only on evidence of the commission of a serious crime and the fact of a potentially long sentence to support a finding of risk of flight, because his maximum charges could be up to 20 years. That's with the max. Probably extremely unlikely that he would receive 20 years. But they say you can't just use a potentially long sentence to support flight risk, right? Rather, the court must sensitively consider several factors, including the length of prison time the defendant faces and his individual circumstances, whether familial and community ties make flight unlikely, his actual ability to flee and evade the law, evidenced by such things as whether he has a passport, familiarity with other countries or locations, and or the financial ability to do so, and the incentive to remain provided by the anticipated harm that will befall any sureties. Moreover, a defendant's past history of compliance with release conditions and court attendance are highly relevant. Okay? Regarding the dangerousness prong, there are 2 components. First, the question is whether the defendant poses a safety risk to any particular individuals, i.e. any other person. Second, as to safety of the community, the question is whether the defendant is likely to criminally recidivate, i.e. commit future crimes against the community as a whole. I don't know. Personally, I don't know if those questions can be answered, but, they'd like to believe he won't. Mr. Combs presents no risk of flight or danger, and the release conditions proposed herein are more than sufficient to assure Mr. Combs' appearance as required and the safety of any person. B. Mr. Combs presents no risk of flight or danger. During the initial bail proceedings, the government argued Mr. Combs was a flight risk because he was charged with serious offenses carrying significant, in some cases, mandatory terms of imprisonment. The circumstances are now the opposite. The base offense level for a violation of the MANN Act is 14 because there are 2 counts. Where am I at? Because there are 2 counts of conviction relating to 2 separate victims. Section 3D1.2 instructs that the counts are grouped separately. Because the offense level for each group is 14 and an additional 2 levels are added, see USSG 3D1.4, resulting in a total offense level of 16. Mr. Combs is in criminal history category I. This results in an expected guidelines range of 21 to 27 months. Mr. Combs has already been incarcerated for 10 months. So they saying that they pushing for 21 to 27 months of punishment. Okay? So that's like a year and a half to 2 years, 3 months type range. They say Mr. Combs has already been incarcerated for 10 months, which would cut his time nearly in half. His sentencing exposure, which we fully respect and do not seek to minimize in any way, is in fact low, and so is any corresponding risk of flight. Now, that is not official. That is not from the government. That is not from the judge. That is simply from their proposal and their own estimation based on their purview of the law, right? Mr. Combs' actions prior to his arrest in 2024 further demonstrate that he is neither a flight risk nor a danger to the community. Mr. Combs knew he was under investigation and likely to be charged early in the year, but he was not arrested until September 2024. In the intervening months, he demonstrated that he is trustworthy and committed to respecting the legal process. But he was found trying to flee the country, wasn't he? What the man? We living in crazy times. I know that much. When it became apparent to counsel that Mr. Combs would be formally charged, Mr. Combs did something extraordinary. He left his home in Miami and traveled to New York, the very location of the prosecutors and having investigated and agents invest. It's extraordinary to turn yourself in. Through counsel, Mr. Combs promptly told the government that he had voluntarily come to New York, offered to tell them specifically where he was, and offered to turn himself in at the appropriate time. The government rejected that offer and elected to arrest him, but Mr. Combs' own conduct was the opposite of flight. He affirmatively and proactively sought to cooperate with the legal process. At least he did that much. I'll give him that, I guess. Even before his offer of self-surrender, Mr. Combs demonstrated a pattern of trustworthiness and cooperation. Mr. Combs' residences were searched in March 2024, and even before that, Mr. Combs and his counsel were aware that the U.S. attorney was investigating him for serious crimes. So he was aware of this before all of this took place. Throughout this time, Mr. Combs acted forthrightly and remained committed to the process. First, shortly after the searches on April 1st, 2024, counsel took possession of Mr. Combs' U.S. passport. On the same day, his counsel advised the prosecutors that Mr. Combs had surrendered his passport, that defense counsel would not return it to him, and that he would not leave the country. The passport remains in defense counsel's possession. Second, counsel advised the government that if Mr. Combs intended to travel domestically, counsel would so inform the AUSAs. All subsequent travel was done with the government's knowledge. Third, Mr. Combs voluntarily relocated to New York on September 5th, 2024. Once Mr. Combs arrived in New York, defense counsel immediately informed the government of Mr. Combs' whereabouts. Fourth, he paid off the mortgage at his residence at 2 West Star Island in Miami. This payment of about $18 million was for one reason alone, so that he would have this $48 million residence free and clear of any encumbrances so that it can be used to secure a bond. All this shows that Mr. Combs is not a flight risk. To the contrary, he has taken extraordinary measures, demonstrating that what he always wanted was to cooperate with the legal process so he could establish his innocence in this court. That is precisely what he did as to the most serious charges against him. Moreover, as for other factors the court must consider, such as familial and community ties, the court need only consider Mr. Combs and his family's conduct over the last 10 months and prior to assure itself that there is simply no risk Mr. Combs will seek to flee or recidivate. Throughout the proceedings, Mr. Combs' family has been seated by his side, demonstrating the same respect for these proceedings and support for Mr. Combs that they will pay going forward. They were here and are here to support him, and he is obviously committed to reuniting with his family to continue to support them, not to flee or put them at further risk. As just a few examples of what Mr. Combs has missed since he has been incarcerated, he has missed the biggest moments in his daughter's life. He missed his twins' high school graduation. They did not have any parent there with them because their mother, Kim Porter, tragically passed away in 2018. He missed his twins' prom. He has a minor daughter, 2.5 years old, who has been without him for 9 months. He needs and wants to be with and remain with his family. Perhaps his actions would have allowed him to be present for all of this had he not been involved in any of this. At today's hearing, the government suggested that Mr. Combs could still be a danger in the sense that he still had the means and ability to commit prostitution crimes. With all due respect, that suggestion is unsupported. The government had, for an extended period of time, a PIN register on his phone. Mr. Combs never called any potential escorts or prostitutes, nor did he make any effort to arrange meetings with escorts or prostitutes, nor was he with Jane in New York. In any event, reasonable conditions would ensure that Mr. Combs would not have the ability to arrange meetings with escorts. Cases overwhelmingly support release under these circumstances. Okay, so now they bring in case law examples. All right, which I'm not going to read all the way through. Now, here are their proposed release conditions. The defense proposes the following bail package: a $1 million bond co-signed by Sean Combs, his mother, his sister, and the mother of his oldest daughter. Mr. Combs' travel will be restricted to the Southern District of Florida, Central District of California, and the Southern District of New York to attend court and meet with his counsel, as well as the Eastern District of New York or the District of New Jersey, only to the extent that his travel to and from New York involves an airport in those districts. Mr. Combs' passport surrendered to pretrial services, drug testing as ordered by pretrial services, all other standard conditions of pretrial supervision. For the foregoing reasons, the court should release Mr. Combs on the proposed conditions. Respectfully submitted by Alexandra Shapiro and co-counsel. All right, so that's the letter from Diddy's defense to the judge. Now here we have the letter from the prosecution, the government, in opposition of Diddy being released. All right. So this is an 8-page proposal as to why Diddy should remain imprisoned while awaiting sentencing. So they say, "Dear Judge Subramanian, the government respectfully submits this letter following the jury trial of the defendant, Sean Combs. Following a 7-week jury trial, the defendant was found guilty of 2 counts of interstate transportation for the purpose of prostitution in violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421A. The defendant has moved for bail pending sentencing under the Bail Reform Act. However, because detention is mandatory under the Bail Reform Act, 18 U.S.C. 3143A2, he is not entitled to release and his detention must be continued." Okay. So they say under the structure of this Bail Reform Act, he needs to stay behind bars until further notice. Okay. So they say background. Over the course of 7 weeks, the jury heard evidence of the defendant's violence, interstate transportation of numerous individuals for prostitution, drug use, and distribution, and attempts to escape law enforcement detection. This conduct spanned 2 decades. Excuse me. At trial, the defendant did not walk away from these facts. Indeed, the defendant embraced the fact that he was a habitual drug user who regularly engaged in domestic abuse. Rather, the defendant argued that despite his repeated violence against girlfriends, he did not engage in trafficking, and despite his prolific drug use, he did not engage in racketeering activity. The jury subsequently acquitted the defendant on counts related to racketeering conspiracy and trafficking. The defendant was convicted of 2 counts of violating the MANN Act by transporting girlfriends and male commercial sex workers interstate for the purpose of engaging in acts of prostitution. Specifically, the defendant caused these individuals to travel interstate and internationally for the purpose of engaging in freak-offs or hotel nights, elaborate multi-day sex performances involving significant drug use that the defendant directed, masturbated during, and often filmed. The evidence presented over the course of 7 weeks showed that the defendant did this repeatedly including after the defendant undisputably knew that he was under federal investigation. So they say, we were just investigating this motherfucker and he knew. And he continued. Additionally, the facts adduced at trial show, among other things, that the defendant serially abused the former girlfriend Cassandra Ventura and that Ms. Ventura sustained injuries from many of these assaults. One such assault that took place in March 2016 was captured on surveillance video. This video, a version of which was published by CNN in May 2024, showed the defendant throwing Ms. Ventura to the ground, kicking her repeatedly, and attempting to drag her down the hallway. This was far from the only assault the defendant perpetrated on Ms. Ventura, and that was while she allegedly was trying to escape a freak off. So there's that too, but you know, the jury. Where was I at? Trial testimony from multiple witnesses recounted numerous other instances of abuse in which the defendant slapped, hit, kicked, and dragged Ms. Ventura by the hair. Despite the defendant's claim in a public social media post that he was a changed man following the leak of the surveillance video, the defendant continued to engage in violent conduct. In June 2024, the defendant choked, kicked, and punched another girlfriend, Jane, and then directed her to take drugs and perform in a freak-off. This incident occurred months after the defendant's residences were searched by federal agents, when the defendant unquestionably understood that he was under federal investigation for trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion. The facts at trial also showed that the defendant regularly bought and consumed drugs, including drugs that he provided to Ms. Ventura and Jane during freak-offs or hotel nights. In addition to the June 2024 violent incident involving Jane, the defendant also engaged in other criminal conduct while he was aware that he was under federal investigation. During the March 2024 searches of the defendant's residencies, law enforcement recovered narcotics and 3 separate firearms with defaced serial numbers. Further, evidence at trial established that the defendant engaged in transportation for purposes of prostitution with Jane as recently as August 2024, a mere month before his arrest, where Jane had sex with an escort in front of the defendant at the defendant's 2-star island residence, where he's asking to be released to. And for those that say, well, the guns don't mean nothing, they were defaced on the serial number. That's illegal. Anyway, indeed, the defendant was planning to fly Jane to New York for that same purpose in September 2024, mere days before his arrest. In September 2024, at the time of his arrest in Manhattan, law enforcement recovered $9,000 cash and drugs, including MDMA and ketamine, from the defendant's hotel room. And if you've kept up at all with this trial, then y'all know that these are 2 of his favorite substances for the freak-offs. Guidelines calculation. The guidelines calculation in this case is complicated, and the government expects that it will be litigated by the parties. Y'all forgot B. For the purposes of this detention hearing, the government sets forth the below preliminary calculation subject to revision, which the government believes is the minimum guidelines calculation applicable to this case. Counts 3 and 5, the guideline applicable to count 3 is USSG 2G1.1. Pursuant to USSG 2G1.1, the base offense level is 14. They say it is a violation of federal law to receive firearms that have obliterated, removed, or altered serial numbers. I said that just a few minutes ago. The guideline applicable to count 5 is USSG 2G1.1. Base level offense is 14. Grouping analysis. Pursuant to USSG 2G1D, because the offense involved more than one victim, Chapter 3, Part D is applied as if the promoting of a commercial sex act or prohibited sexual conduct in respect to each victim had been contained in a separate count of conviction. Because there are more than 6 victims in each victim, as if they had been contained separate count of convictions, there are more than 5 groups. Each group has an offense level of 14. Even setting aside Ms. Ventura and Jane, the evidence at trial showed that the defendant transported 7 escorts: Jules Theodore, Clayton Howard, Julian Sapp, Cabral Williams, Paul Arthur, Michael Ijiwako, aka Reggie, and Rico Bazant, for the purposes of promoting commercial sex acts. Accordingly, under section USSG 2G1.1D, there are more than 6 victims. Victim means a person transported, persuaded, induced, enticed, or coerced to engage in or travel for the purpose of engaging in a commercial sex act or prohibited sexual conduct, whether or not the person consented to the commercial sex act or prohibited sexual conduct. In calculating the combined offense level pursuant to USSG 3D 1.4, because the 5 groups are equally serious, the offense level is 19. Pursuant to USSG 3B1, Point one, because the defendant was a manager or supervisor and the criminal activity was otherwise extensive, 3 levels are added. The evidence at trial showed that the defendant was a manager or supervisor of one or more other participants, namely Ms. Ventura and Jane. Further, the criminal activity was otherwise extensive. When considering whether criminal activity was otherwise extensive, application note 3 instructs the court to consider all persons involved during the course of the entire offense. As an example of criminal activity that could be otherwise extensive, the application describes a fraud that involved only 3 participants but used the unknowing services of many outsiders. Here, the evidence at trial demonstrated that the defendant used the services of many of his employees, including his chief of staff, Christina Coram, which I'm not sure why y'all didn't bring her in the RICO, but she must have cut a deal. His travel advisor, his security staff, and his assistants in order to carry out the offenses of conviction. Even if all of those employees were unknowing participants, their years-long assistance in facilitating the criminal activity satisfies the criteria for this enhancement. And there's no fucking way that they were unaware for 15 years while simultaneously taking part, setting the stuff up. Knew that these women were going through it and just pushing it along. Pursuant to USSG 3C 1.1, because the defendant willfully obstructed or impeded or attempted to obstruct or impede the administration of justice with respect to the investigation and prosecution of counts 3 and 5, and the obstructive conduct related to those counts and relevant conduct, 2 levels are added. The defendant attempted to obstruct justice with regard to counts 3 and 5 in multiple respects, including his attempts to pay off security guards following his assault of Ms. Ventura at the Intercontinental Hotel in LA, and in his calls to Jane following the settlement of Ms. Ventura's lawsuit. With regard to the Intercontinental Hotel assault, USSG 3C 1.1 Application Note 1 provides that obstructive conduct that occurred prior to the start of the investigation of the instant offense of conviction may be covered by this guideline if the conduct was purposefully calculated and likely to thwart the investigation or prosecution of the offense of conviction. The evidence at trial showed that in the minutes following his assault of Ms. Ventura, the defendant offered Israel Flores a stack of cash and attempted to shut Mr. Flores out of the hotel room where Jules Theodore, an escort whom the defendant had previously transported for the purpose of engaging in prostitution, was hiding his offense. In addition, as the testimony of Eddie Garcia revealed, because, that's bribery. Eddie Garcia revealed in the following days, the defendant took further steps to pay off security staff to secure a video of his crimes, preventing further law enforcement investigation. With regard to the defendant's recorded calls to Jane in November 2024, the defendant attempted to feed Jane a false narrative regarding her participation in hotel nights to silence Jane and prevent the law enforcement investigation into the conduct, which encompasses the conduct underlying counts 3 and 5 that gave rise to the case. Accordingly, the total offense level for counts 3 and 5 is 24. Again, this is their estimation based on how they present case law. Criminal history category based upon this office's current understanding, including through representations by the defense. The defendant has 0 criminal history points. In accordance with the above, the defendant's criminal history category is I. Sentence range. Accordingly, based only on the preliminary calculations set forth above, the defendant's guidelines range is at least 51 to 63 months imprisonment. Okay? So they're looking at anywhere between 4 to 5 years, give or take a few months. Right? In prison. The government notes, however, that which still, based on what they were trying to get them, is still low, right? But that's what they're pushing for, is somewhere in the range of 4 years and a couple months to 5 years and a few months, which he could still get out and try to rebound his career after that, Not to mention what happens if they apply time served 10 months towards that, you damn near shave off a year. The government notes, however, that the guidelines applicable at sentencing may be higher than this preliminary calculation. The government has not had adequate time to carefully consider all potentially applicable guideline provisions. For example, as the court is aware, evidence presented at trial in support of the defendant's convictions on counts 3 and 5 overlaps substantially with evidence related to the trafficking counts. Accordingly, much of this conduct is not included in the guidelines definition of acquitted conduct and may be relevant to the guidelines calculation. For instance, the government expects to seek the application of the 4-point enhancement pursuant to USSG 2G 1.1b 1bi for offenses involving fraud or coercion. The government requires additional time to consider any other potential enhancements or cross-references that may be applicable. And here they get into all of these different case law examples, once again, which I will not read all the way through. Okay. Analysis. The defendant must be detained pursuant to the Bail Reform Act, as they said above at the top. As detailed above, the offenses of conviction constitute crimes of violence and mandate detention following the defendant's conviction. Here, the defendant has been convicted of 2 such crimes. Because of the near impossibility of meeting the stringent criteria set out in Section 3143A2AB, the only conceivable basis for release here is the existence of exceptional circumstances. However, as the Second Circuit has recognized, that exception is a very narrow exception. Indeed, the circuit has reversed a district court's decision to release a defendant on bail pending sentencing on this basis. Okay. The defendant utterly fails to show such exceptional circumstances. Here, as detention is mandatory following a conviction of a Mann Act offense, the government has been unable to locate a case in which a defendant was released from custody following such a conviction. Indeed, the government has only identified several cases where the defendant was detained pre-trial and remained detained through sentencing. Okay. Here, there is a heightened burden that the defendant must carry now that he has been convicted of 2 felony Mann Act offenses because of his mandatory detention. Even if detention was not mandatory here, which it is, the defendant cannot meet his burden to show by clear and convincing evidence that he is not likely to flee or pose a danger to any other person or the community. First, given the significant potential penalties, the defendant continues to be a flight risk. As described in Section 2 above, at a minimum, the defendant faces a guidelines range of 51 to 63 months imprisonment, and the guidelines range found at sentencing may be higher. The possibility of a substantial sentence such as this is a significant factor in assessing the risk of flight. So the government believes that he will try to flee. I don't know if Diddy's going to try to flee. I don't think it would be wise on his part to try to flee, but we don't know where his current mindset is if he were to be released. Second, the defendant cannot meet his burden to demonstrate by clear and convincing evidence that he is not a danger to the community. The overwhelming evidence established at trial, which the defendant did not dispute, shows that the defendant has engaged in a years-long pattern of abuse and violence, including as recently as June 2024, approximately 3 months before his arrest. Despite the knowledge that he was under federal investigation, the defendant nevertheless brutally assaulted Jane, leaving injuries that were visible for days after the assault. Additionally, when the defendant traveled to New York City, where according to defense counsel, the defendant was waiting to be arrested in this case, he was in possession of drugs and the materials necessary for a freak-off. The defendant's conduct after he understood that he was under federal investigation underscores that he continues to be a danger to others and is either unable or unwilling to follow the law. For the reasons set forth above, the defendant's continued detention is required under the Bail Reform Act. Accordingly, the defendant's application for bail pending sentencing should be denied. Now, what exactly is the Mann Act? Okay, the Mann Act was previously called the White Slave Traffic Act of 1910. What the fuck type of name is that to be convicted of? Is a United States federal law passed June 25th, 1910. It is named after Congressman James Robert Mann of Illinois. In its original form, the act made it a felony to engage in interstate or foreign commerce transport of any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery or for any other immoral purpose. Its primary stated intent was to address prostitution, immorality, and human traffic, particularly where trafficking was the purpose of prostitution. It's funny how the language of the Mann Act actually includes trafficking, but he was not found guilty of trafficking. It was one of several acts of protective legislation aimed at moral reform during the Progressive Era. In practice, its ambiguous language about immorality resulted in it being used to criminalize even consensual sexual behavior between adults. Interesting. That's what Diddy's defense was mostly arguing for. It was amended by Congress in 1978 and again in 1986 to limit its application to transport for the purpose of prostitution or other illegal sexual acts. Interesting. Here we have a letter coming from Cassie. Okay? Or Cassie's lawyer, rather, on behalf of Cassie, to the judge. They say we write as counsel for Cassandra Ventura to respectfully request that the court deny Mr. Combs to be released pending his sentencing on his 2 convictions under 18 U.S.C. 2421. Pursuant to the Bail Reform Act, 18 U.S.C. 1343A2, detention is mandatory post-conviction on these charges, and Ms. Ventura believes that Mr. Combs is likely to pose a danger to the victims who testified in this case, including herself, as well as to the community. All right? So Cassie has submitted a letter to the judge saying she fears for her own safety if Diddy is in fact released on bail or bond. We've got another letter here from Deontay Nash to the judge. It says, Dear Judge Subramanian, I am writing to express my grave concern over the prospect of Sean Combs being released from custody. While I appreciate the fairness you have shown throughout this proceeding, I feel compelled to be unequivocal about the danger he poses to the public and to the individuals who have risked everything by coming forward. Mr. Combs has a long, well-documented history of violent, coercive, and retaliatory behavior. Over the years, he has repeatedly escaped meaningful accountability, and each time, this has only reinforced his sense of impunity. If he is released now, I have no doubt he will see it as yet another license to continue intimidating, threatening, and harming people who challenge or expose him. Many of us have firsthand knowledge of the fear he instills in those around him. I can say without hesitation that he is a serious and immediate threat to victims, witnesses, and the broader community. His pattern of violence, particularly while engaged in the trafficking of individuals for prostitution, combined with unchecked substance abuse, makes it clear that he is not ready to re-enter society safely or responsibly. To release Mr. Combs without substantial consequence would undermine the integrity of this process and send a dangerous message that wealth and influence can shield someone indefinitely from accountability. It will also endanger those who cooperated with this investigation under subpoena, who are already living in fear of retaliation. I urge you in the strongest possible terms to prioritize the safety of victims and witnesses over any consideration of leniency. Mr. Combs has had countless opportunities to change, and he has chosen instead to escalate his harmful conduct. Allowing him back into the community now would be a profound mistake. Thank you for your time and your commitment to protecting the public from those who repeatedly demonstrate they are unwilling to respect the law. Respectfully, Deontay Nash. So those are 2 letters from the judge saying, hey man, if y'all let him out, he could probably fuck me up or anyone that was involved in the pursuing of facts in this case. We will have to see. And that's Cassie with the letter and another from Deontay Nash. And if you don't remember who Deontay Nash is, he is former stylist of Diddy and Cassie. He was a witness in the case, and he witnessed multiple violent acts from Diddy, some of which he allegedly tried to stop. He tried to jump on Diddy's back at one point, got tossed off, and, you know, he proceeded to beat up on, I think, Mia. So this is somebody with firsthand knowledge of Diddy's violent past. So yeah, y'all, at this current juncture, I don't know what's gonna happen moving forward. I do believe somewhere at 5 or around 5 o'clock p.m. this evening, the judge will be able to determine his fate as to whether or not he will be released to go back home in Florida, or if he will remain in custody while he awaits sentencing. Okay? The letters have been submitted around 5 o'clock. They're supposed to actually reconvene at the courtroom, and further instruction will be given. Let me know what y'all think of all this down below in the comments. Be sure to like and share this video. If this is your first time seeing me on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, become an insider. I'll catch y'all on the next one, man.
King of my city and cul-de-sac. Coming out swinging like soldier rag. Leading my people like quarterback. Boy, I study this shit, I'm an almanac. Had to get up and grind. Knowledge is booming, I'm here to apply. Came with the chip and the dip, it just single the mind. We finna do more than survive. I need my check. Spinning the block for the Gouda. We hitting the jeweler to flood out the net. We don't do beef for computers, I'm straight out the sewer. We come when you rest. Niggas be looking perplexed, so keeping my foot on their neck. No map, I trust my gut for the quest. With drama, I'm fully abreast. I was ready for years and they doubted me. All of a sudden they tell me they proud of me. I've been dropping these haters like calories. Cross them out, I came back with some battery. Stand for my honor, but too raw, no corner. Packing the stick with a drummer. Wanna catch my bad, won't fumble. I done came too far to be humble.